Okay, Travis Wayne Goodsill. This video is going to be an instructional one on how and why psychiatry, psychology, all of those therapies and social sciences are pseudoscience, not hard sciences. So let me help illustrate with a analogy. Okay, you're working on the roof of your house, and in the process you fall off the roof, and you land on the ground, and you get rushed to the hospital, and the doctor finally meets with you, and he sits down, and all he does for a whole hour is just sit and talk with you about your feelings. At the end of the hour, your session is over, and he writes you a prescription for opioids and sends you home on your way. Do you see what's wrong with that? I hope so. I hope there's not a single doctor anywhere who does that. But yet, psychiatry does. And that's the issue I'm going to address today, is what makes them think they can get away with this. Why the courts are letting them get away with this, especially in Utah. And this is a medical malpractice fraud scam that's being perpetuated on the whole United States, but specifically in Utah because of the high ranking that it is given here in Utah. And they're enshrined in Utah law, not just as a recognized business entity, but also as an official professional witness in court cases. In Utah, psychiatric evaluators determine competency for trial. And so, yeah, all right. So anyway, a Mormon Utahn back around World War II time, name of Stanley Smith Stevens, is the one responsible for the methodology utilized by psychiatry, specifically here in Utah, but I'm sure elsewhere. But his methodology was to do the naming. So you know, you've heard people bully somebody saying, "Oh, you're retarded," or "You're dumb," or "You're slow." You know, those are bullying slangs, but that's exactly what he was doing. He was giving credible names, but they were being used in the field in a bullying manner. And so they have technical terms for all these things. Schizophrenia, for example. Ooh, that sounds mighty technical. I don't know if I'm qualified to make such a diagnosis about this. I'll leave it to you. And that's where they get you. They come up with field-specific naming that is not understood by the common people or the courts, the government, and as a result, they're able to deceive people as to what they're really doing and how they come to their conclusions. Okay, so that was the first thing that Stanley Smith Stevens did, was establish categorization naming. So now we have people with autism, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, etc., etc., etc. And 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 so again, the way you get placed in these categories is by your outward symptoms. So if you are behaving, acting, speaking in a certain way, you get categorized by that. And when they categorize you, they're able to control you. It's the similar tactic of they falsely accuse you over and over and over and over again until you believe it, and then you act upon that false accusation, believing that you are that condition, and then you then produce the results of such a person who acts in that manner, and then they justify it saying, see, we were right, you do have this. That's what they do in psychiatry. And so if they're compelled to give a diagnosis to the courts, for example, they only get an hour, and if they have to extend, they put in a request for an extension, and then they go back and do a second hour. And that's it for the courts here in Utah. You know, a person with no history, they get evaluated for the first time, and 1 hour, maybe 2, is all they do, just sitting and talking. And then they present to the judge their name-calling terminology categorization and make their recommendation, which, of course, they're going to say, hey, psychiatry needs money too, we need job security, so we need customers. So it's easy to be presenting malpractice and fraud in such a business that is a pseudoscience. It's not a hard science. So Stanley Smith Stevens also did typing, types of the categories. And he had 2 types, dichotomous and non-dichotomous. Dichotomous, it's 2 ways, like yes or no, good or bad, right or wrong, those types of things. And so for psychiatry, if you want to use the dichotomous typing for the categorization, you ask questions that only can be answered one way or the other, oftentimes yes or no. And lawyers do this when they're questioning witnesses on the stand in court. This is illegal. It's the other lawyer should be standing up opposing the questioning to the witness. Your Honor, objection. It's giving the witness only 2 options to choose from. And so that's not being done, obviously, especially as we watch the TV shows on courts and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm sure many of you are familiar with court processes in your state or district or wherever you are, and can testify to that truth, that they will ask yes or no questions. And people, get frustrated because many times it's not yes or no. There are other factors involved, and that's, the perjury trap that people talk about. That's part of how they do that, is they only allow for 2 answers and you have to choose between two answers. And so they might ask, when you drink alcohol, do you feel lightheaded, or do you feel sick to your stomach? Something like that. And it's a trap in that if you don't drink alcohol at all, there is no answer to either of those. I don't drink alcohol. That's not what I asked you. Answer the question. I don't drink alcohol. Your Honor, he's being belligerent. And yeah, psychiatry asks those kinds of questions. And but they've learned how to avoid that and make it appear that they're asking more options for you. And that's where non-dichotomous comes from. And in non-dichotomous is the spectrum type. In spectrum questioning, this is where Cambridge Analytica comes in with the apps that were on Facebook. This is the whole scandal and how they perpetuated it and then used that against us to put targeted ads to people who they knew from the answers they gave to those app questions and how to manipulate their minds so that people would be fooled into chanting, lock her up. You know, that came from this whole process. And they fooled many people on that. And Flynn is now a victim of perpetuating that Russian advertising fraud on Americans. And so it's you've probably seen it in questions of never, almost never, or yeah, almost never, seldom, sometimes, most of the time, all the time, always. That's the spectrum. And then people have to choose within the spectrum. And that's perpetuated in the political parties, because you have within, you have the left wing, right wing, and moderates, and but within each party, the Democrat Party has right-wing Democrats, left-wing Democrats, and moderate Democrats. All they're doing is utilizing Stanley Smith Stevens' categorization typing of non-dichotomous spectrum. And Republicans do it as well, where left-wing Republicans, right-wing Republicans, and moderate Republicans. So it's spread throughout the whole United States, and it is a cultural problem that we're facing. And that's how Russia influenced the 2016 election in that area. They were doing many other things also, but that one particular area, that's how they did it. They used the pseudoscience technique to manipulate American voters, to lie and deceive them as to what's going on. And they're still doing it, apparently. It's still going on. Facebook still is getting chastised for not making the changes, and more things are coming out that they didn't reveal 2 years ago. And then YouTube and Instagram and all those other companies are also guilty of the same things. And yeah, we're still under attack. And yeah, I'm trying to tell people that you don't need a declaration of war from Congress to go to war or to consider the attacking country an enemy. That's what they're trying to say here about treason, because of Flynn and the judge thinking, hey, you're guilty of treason. Why isn't he charged for treason? And but yeah, that's another topic. But an enemy is one who's attacking you. That is the definition. So even though some government entity at one point in time in our history said, oh, it's only when Congress declares war against somebody, then they're the enemy. No, if you're under attack and they're killing you off, or they're stealing from you, or rigging your elections, you're under attack by an enemy. They are not your friend. And so, yes, anybody dealing with Russia is dealing with the enemy. They are traitors to this country. So the Mormon Church, you know that I do lots of Mormon stuff. The Mormon Church are committing treason by dealing with the enemy, trying to get a temple in Russia. They can't escape it by being a church. Russia gets compromat on everybody they do business with. The church is doing business with Russia to build buildings and temples in Russia. Therefore, Russia has compromat on the Mormon Church. It's that simple. That's what they do. And so the church is guilty of some criminal behavior that Russia will exploit if the LDS Church does not conform to what Russia wants them to do. And apparently the church is committing that crime with the LLCs and the laundering of money through those LLCs and putting it into the stock market to launder it further. And so, yeah, psychiatry is what I'm talking about here. Okay, so we want to keep this as short as possible for you. And so, yeah, the spectrum disorder, or the spectrum scale, is Stanley Smith Stevens' invention. He came up with it. And psychiatrists say, oh, yeah, this is a measurement tool that works great for diagnosis. No. Like I said, if you went to your medical doctor and all he did was sit and talk to you about your feelings and then give you a prescription for opioids at the end of the hour session, you'd sue him for malpractice. Especially if your leg was broken in the fall from the roof. Because he would need to do x-rays. He would need to do blood work. He would need to do all sorts of actual measurements with measurement devices. Psychiatry doesn't do that. And that's why they're a fraud. And so our government is aiding and abetting in fraudulently abusing we the people by allowing them to exist as a legitimate government business, or as a legitimate business, and the utilization of them as a recognized authority in the courts. Whether they become expert witnesses on the stand to say, yes, I talked to the person for an hour and they shared with me their feelings, and after such I believe that they are guilty of the crime, hang them. But we'll take care of them if you want. We've got a room available that we need money to compensate us for, so yeah, feel free. The pharmaceutical companies that give out the psychotropic drugs are also wanting more money, and we need a test subject, guinea pig, to test out this drug that they want promoted. Ooh, yeah, now we're getting into criminal behavior of them, aren't we? But that's what they do. They're a fraudulent business. They're putting themselves out as medical in the sense of the brain, the health of the brain, and they are obviously they are not making correct diagnoses, and as a result they are prescribing the wrong drugs. All they're doing is giving drugs that control the outward symptoms. Can you imagine if you went to your doctor and he just looked at you, you told your symptoms, and he said, oh yeah, you have a cold, it'll go away in a few days, here's a prescription for some heavy-duty cough medicine or cold medicine, and then you go and you die because it was pneumonia. So you see that doctors can't do it, psychiatrists can't do it. You can't treat symptoms. You have to identify the cause. If you don't identify the cause, there will be many times where you will make a mistake in your treatment of such a person. And yeah, so if you're, I went, yeah, so yeah, I've got experiences and I can babble on about this for hours, but I wanted to get it out there. Psychiatry is a fraud. It is a pseudoscience because they don't actually identify the cause. And they will admit there's no cure for this disease or that disease. We don't have cures. There's no cures for mental illness. But then everybody goes to them for the symptom treatment. And no, I should talk about, we used to have in the United States asylums. That came from the old world, brought over to the new world, and we had asylums. Utah, notorious for their asylum. People who didn't speak English were put in Utah's asylum. They were considered mentally ill if they couldn't speak English. It's on the registry. Anybody can go and look at it. It's now the museum thing. Nobody was held accountable for the misdiagnoses. And then you have John F. Kennedy, President Kennedy, who signed the act or the bill. It may have been an executive order, but he stopped asylums. And no more asylums. We needed medical treatment for people with mental problems. And so what Utah did was take their asylum and rename it as the Utah State Hospital. Oh, it's now called a hospital, therefore it's legitimate. And we're conforming to the presidential order. See how they're deceiving people? To see how they're giving the finger to the government, the federal government? It's not a hospital. There are no doctors. It's all psychiatrists. But yet, when they get their PhD in psychiatry, they're now called doctors. It's like a chiropractor who gets a PhD. Yeah, I'm a doctor. Oh, what's your specialty? Chiropractic. Oh, if you've seen 2.5 Men, that is more funny to you because you know about the two brothers, and the one is the chiropractor. And so there's lots of jokes about chiropractors not being real doctors. But psychiatrists are not doctors at all. And so they're a doctor just because of a PhD. And so they're promoting themselves as being medical when in reality all it is that they just got a PhD in the field. So that's another fraud that they're perpetuating upon people. And so, yeah, the Utah Psychiatric Association is also a fraudulent organization. And the United States Psychiatric Association, or the Psychiatric Association of America, I'm not sure how they titled it, but yeah, it's a fraudulent organization. And even though they claim to have a mission statement and rules that govern how to diagnose and treat people, it doesn't matter. It's all pseudoscience. It's all fraudulent. And so what they're doing is trying to give legitimacy in the eyes of the government to continue to be a legitimate business. And they're not. We need to have crackdowns on anybody who has practiced psychiatry. You know, a big sweeping arrest of everybody in the field and lock them up, lock them up. and you know, they've got to be held accountable because they know they're committing fraud. They know they're deceiving people. They know they're not correct just by sitting down and talking to people about their feelings. It's that simple. They know, and they are making people believe otherwise. So it's a fraud. We need to stand up against it. We need to get it out of our government and be considered illegitimate again. It used to be illegitimate, remember? In my day, as a little kid, you know, people used to say, crazy psycho treatment. I don't need no doctor getting into my brain. And they don't get into your brain. That's the thing. You know, they don't do any testing to examine your brain and your chemical balancing or your electrodes going off there. They don't do any of that. And that can all be done by a medical doctor. Medical doctors have the tools to examine and look for causal problems, maladies in the brain. And we need to get governments to recognize this and make the change. Ban psychiatry, move all patients into the medical field so that they get treated by real doctors and not treated for their symptoms, but get treated for actual causal problems so that we can then start finding cures. You know, we can't find a cure if nobody's looking for a cause. And psychiatry aren't looking for causes. They're just treating symptoms. As a result, nobody is getting cured. They've got great job security, don't they? So I think I've covered all the topics, but you know, all I have left now is experience. But I hope you understand. I hope we can rise up against this, because you've seen it happen. You know, Trump, in the beginning, you had those 25 psychiatrists write a letter to Congress and say, hey, he's got a mental illness, and then they write a book about it, and no, Trump is just evil. He's got compromise on him from dealing with the Russians. It's that simple. You don't need a psychiatrist to sit you on a couch and talk to Trump for an hour and then say, oh yeah, he's crazy. He's a compulsive liar. I've put him in a box now. That's his category. He's a compulsive liar. So, yeah. I hope this was educational for you. I hope you understand. I hope you see the urgency of getting rid of all psychiatrists and anybody affiliated in the psychiatric field, which includes therapists. You know, not physical therapists. Those are fine because they actually help with the like people who have been in coma. They need to learn how to walk again and move and eat and all that. So they're needed. But in psychiatry, there is no such help for that. So yeah, there is, however, a job title. I can't remember what it's called, but they help people who have had brain injury and are trying to recover. And so, or if they've forgotten things, they help them remember. That's a kind of therapy that's good. But a therapist where you just go and you sit and you talk to them for an hour period of time, and then at the end you go your way, and then they refer you to drug treatment and blah blah blah. So yeah, I hope you understand the distinctions, and the categorizations. So caseworkers, all they're doing is the orders of psychiatrists, which is a fraudulent thing in the first place. So caseworkers are being duped. You need to all walk off the job. Say, we will not work for a corrupt business. And then you need to whistleblow, etc., etc. Take this agency down. Take this business down. Get everybody thrown in prison for their crimes against us and against our loved ones and against those who are really suffering, who need a cure, not a symptom cover-up. So, yeah, like I said, I can talk all about this for hours. So, yeah, there you go.